Priscii Latini was a term used in Roman tradition to describe the earliest Latin peoples who lived in the region of Latium before the foundation of Rome. The expression Priscii Latini in Latin means the ancient Latins, or the first Latins, and the Romans used it to refer to the tribes that inhabited Latium before Rome became dominant. These peoples lived across a wide territory stretching from the southern banks of the Tiber River to the Alban Hills, the coastal plains, and the inland valleys. The Romans believed that their own origins were connected to these early Latin communities, and at the same time they thought that the Trojan descendants of Aeneas had merged with these native peoples. For this reason, the Priscii Latini were seen both as representatives of the world that existed before Rome and as ancestors of the Roman people. They lived in small settlements and early towns, forming a society based mainly on agriculture and animal husbandry, long before the emergence of Rome as a city. The region of Latium, where the Priscii Latini lived, was geographically favourable for settlement. This land included fertile plains and gentle hills, located between the Tiber River and the Volscian Mountains. The rich soil made agriculture possible and encouraged stable communities. The Priscii Latini are usually imagined as farming populations, who cultivated the land and raised animals. Their settlements were generally small and governed by local leaders. Urban life was not yet fully developed. Instead, there were hilltop villages and modest towns. Over time, some of these settlements grew into more important centres such as Alba Longa, Lavinium, and Ardea. These early communities formed the human landscape into which Rome would later emerge. In Roman tradition, one of the most important centres of the Priscii Latini was Alba Longa. Alba Longa was regarded as the ancient capital of the Latin peoples and the leading city among them. Roman writers described the kings of Alba Longa as rulers who exercised authority over the Latin tribes. The Latin peoples gathered regularly in the Alban Hills for shared ceremonies and assemblies. These gatherings strengthened their sense of common identity. Even after Rome rose to power, the Romans continued to perform religious ceremonies in the Alban Hills, preserving the memory of the ancient Latin past. This continuity shows how deeply the Priscii Latini were connected to Roman identity. The origins of the Priscii Latini reach back to very early periods of Italian history. Modern historians generally believe that they belonged to the Italic branch of the Indo-European peoples. These groups probably entered Italy toward the end of the second millennium BCE, moving from Central Europe or through the Balkan regions. Over time, they settled in Latium and formed the population that later became known as the Latins. The Latin language developed from the speech of these early communities. As Rome grew in power, Latin eventually spread throughout Italy and later across much of the Mediterranean world. The social structure of the Priscii Latini was based on tribal organization. Each tribe consisted of several large families who believed that they shared common ancestors. Leaders or chieftains governed these communities and commanded warriors during times of conflict. In peaceful times, the population depended mainly on agriculture and animal husbandry. They cultivated crops such as wheat and barley and grew vines, while also raising sheep and cattle. Their houses were simple structures built from wood, clay, and reeds, reflecting a modest rural way of life. These early settlements formed the social and economic foundations of later Latin civilization. The religious beliefs of the Priscii Latini were closely connected with the natural world. Forests, springs, hills, and sacred groves were regarded as holy places. The gods were associated with natural forces such as the sky, rain, fertility, and growth. One of the most important deities was Jupiter Latiaris, who was considered the common protector of the Latin peoples. Ceremonies dedicated to this god were held on the Alban Mount, where representatives of the Latin communities gathered to perform sacrifices and rituals. These ceremonies symbolized the unity of the Latin peoples and reinforced their shared traditions. In Roman mythology, the Priscii Latini appear as the native population that eventually united with the Trojan followers of Aeneas. According to legend, when Aeneas arrived in Latium, he was received by King Latinus, whose people were identified with the Priscii Latini. The marriage of Aeneas and Lavinia symbolized the union between the Trojan newcomers and the ancient Latin population. From this union came the lineage that eventually produced the Roman people. For this reason, the Priscii Latini represent the native roots of Rome in Roman tradition. The Priscii Latini also played an important role in the legendary history of Rome's foundation. The ancestors of Romulus and Remus were believed to have lived at Alba Longa, which was regarded as a centre of the Latin peoples. Because of this connection, the early Roman kings were considered to descend from the Priscii Latini. In the early history of Rome, the Latin peoples were viewed as related communities who shared common traditions and ancestry with the Romans. During the Roman Republic, the name Priscii Latini continued to be used as a historical term. Roman historians refer to the Priscii Latini when describing the earliest periods before Rome's rise. The expression became a general designation for the ancient Latin peoples who had inhabited Latium before the emergence of Roman power. The idea of the Priscii Latini became an important element in the formation of Roman identity. The Romans wished to connect themselves both to the Trojan lineage of Aeneas and to the ancient Latin population of Italy. As a result, Rome's origins were explained as the product of two different sources: the foreign Trojan ancestry and the native Latin peoples represented by the Priscii Latini. This tradition reflected the belief that Rome was created through the blending of different cultures and peoples. The Priscii Latini were therefore remembered as the earliest inhabitants of Latium before the rise of Rome. They began as rural communities of farmers living in small villages, gradually developing settlements that formed the foundation of Latin civilization. As Rome expanded, these peoples were absorbed into Roman society, but their language and customs became the basis of Roman culture. For this reason, the Priscii Latini were regarded as some of the oldest and most important ancestors of the Roman people.